how we continue to draw close to you. Just watch over those on their way here, those family and friends that are battling illness or sickness. We all are. We just thank you for your love and mercy and mercy.
Amen. All right, so we're continuing from last week, the story of Deborah and Barak. If you recall from last week, we introduced 4 characters in our story. We have Deborah, of course, and Barak. We also talked about King Jabin and his commander, Sisera. And so if you remember from last week, Deborah is down here. She's holding court. She's doing the judge type of thing. So it kind of gives us a picture of when the judges are not at war delivering God's people like he calls them up to do. During peacetime, they're actually settling disputes, holding court. So she's down there. We talked a little bit about she's a prophet, so she's also really in tune with the voice of God. And she calls for Barak, and Barak is all the way up there to the very top in Kadesh. He's got an army. He's got the 2 tribes up there that he has 10,000 men. And so she calls him down. He comes down, meets with Deborah. And if you remember last week, she basically, as a prophet, tells him the word of the Lord. The Lord has commanded him to go and take his 10,000 men and to go to Mount Tabor, and that God will deliver Sisera and his army into his hands. And what does Barak do? Who remembers from last week? Does he say, yes, I hear the word of the Lord, I will go straight away, go get my army and do what the Lord commands? What does he do? I'll go if you go. So we talked a little bit about his reluctance, that he really wanted to have Deborah go with him. And so he's giving an ultimatum here. He's showing a little bit of lack of faith. And we talked a little bit about he's starting to think a little bit like a pagan. A pagan would want some sort of special magician to go with them, or a special lucky charm to go with them, to be with them as they do this. And so Deborah's response, and this is where we kind of left off last week, she says, very well, in verse 9, very well, I'll go with you, but because of the way you're going about this, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will hand Sisera over to a woman. Does someone else have a different translation there? This is NIV. I was just curious. It seems pretty. Does everybody's kind of sound that way? Okay, but it kind of gives a, hey, but because of the way you're going about this, kind of like in a scolding kind of way. This is the way it's going to play out. You're not going to get the honor. You're not going to be the commander, the hero of the story. The honor is going to go to somewhere else.
No glory for you.
No glory for you. So she willingly goes. So Deborah goes with Barak. So she travels up to Kadesh. He has the 2 tribes, the Zebulun and the Naphtali tribe, and those 10,000 soldiers. And so they get up there, and we're about to have a battle. And in verse 11, we have just kind of out of nowhere, we have something else going on. It says, now Heber, the Kenite, had left the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, Moses' brother-in-law, and pitched his tent by the great tree of Zenaniv near Kildesh. So in the middle of this story about Deborah and Barak, we have this totally different scene going on. This Kenite, remember who the Kenites are? They are the nomadic tribe of people that are friendly to the Israelites. And so, but here's something going on here. This one particular family decides to separate from the rest of the clan, and they're going to go pitch their tents up there. And later on, we're going to find out that they were friendly with King Jabin, and so that's why they have moved up north and have pitched their tents. So remember this family, Heber, because this is going to come into play a little bit later as we get introduced to our final character of the story. And so in verse 12 it says, the report went to Sisera that Barak had gone up to Mount Tabor. Sisera gathered together his 900 chariots and all the men with him, and remember, he was from over here, this Hagasheth, Haglayim. So they go from there to the Kishon River. All right, so we're now ready for verse 14. In verse 14 it says, then Deborah said to Barak, go this day, the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? So Barak went down Mount Tabor, followed by 10,000 men. And at Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army by the sword. And Sisera abandoned his chariot and fled on foot. So here we see Deborah again prophesying. So she has delivered the word of the Lord to Barak a second time. And she has said, hey, it's time to go. God, the Lord God has said, go. Does he hesitate this time? Does he hem-haw? He doesn't. No, he goes, he actually acts this time. And I think this is important because I think this is why we see, it was brought up last week. Well, he's in Hebrews chapter 11. And so he shows great faith here by when she finally says, the Lord's ready, he's ready for you to go, he goes. And I think that's a testament to his faith.
I was talking to my son-in-law the other day about what he did over in Afghanistan and Iraq. And when I understood things like forward operating base, that was where he went back to get supplies. And I always thought that's where they fought him. But talking to him, it's not. And I kind of wonder if that's not what's going on here with Deborah, is that he wanted her to go with him, but she was only going to go to a place where she was going to be kept safe, like the FOB, the forward operating base. And
right.
Then when she said, now you go into battle because the Lord's already given him over to you, he was okay with that because he knew he could always still come back.
So that Mount Tabor, they had the high ground. That's where they're at. They're up there. That's where Deborah is. And so part of that great faith was actually leaving the hill country where those chariots could not go and marching his 10,000 men down to the plains, the river plains, where they're going to fight this battle, where they're exposed. They're exposed to these iron chariots, where they're in great danger as just a light foot army.
So you stayed up on Mount Tabor?
Yes. We don't have any indication that she was a part of the battle. That there are some, when I was searching for pictures, there are some pictures of Deborah with swords and wielding swords and a warrior. That's not what we see here. What we see clearly is Barak is the one that God intended to lead the battle. Not to say that Deborah's not important in this story, but when it comes to that judge, the deliverer that's going to take the military and fight against those that are oppressing God's people, it's Barak in this situation.
Barak would not have done what he did.
I would say that that's probably correct. Yeah. She was very important. And also he had remember last week we talked about, he had those 2 tribes, but here's who else showed up. And here's who didn't show up to the battle. And so Barak had these 2 tribes here pretty much under his influence. But I would imagine that Deborah, because she was from Ephraim, in that area, she had influence. She had the political influence to gather these other tribes to get them to pitch in and help. And so she was very important, more from a political leadership point of view, where he was the one that was going to do the actual fighting of the battle. So good question. And so she says that the Lord has gone down ahead, or the Lord has where did I read that?
14. Deborah said to Barak, "Up for this day which the Lord has delivered Sisera into your hand. Has not the Lord gone out before you?" So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following.
That's where it was. Has not the Lord gone down before you? So who's leading this battle? Is it Barak? No, God. God is leading. We're going to see when we get into the next chapter, God has a spiritual hand in this battle. John.
I think the Hebrew of Deborah's English, I think that's part of God's plan. Because if they caught him off guard, was 900 children who would bring out on the floor, and they wouldn't have been able to have the route that they ended up having. Complete destruction of those 900 chariots, that wouldn't have happened if they had caught him in the city, or if they caught him off guard, or if they got God's working, even though we would say that's kind of a negative thing, but he didn't know them to do it well, it's this way to do it well. If that hadn't happened, the 900 chariots would have been saved, and we would not get caught in everything.
Right. Good point. So the battle happens. It was a complete rout. We talked last week that the Hebrew word there is used before when they were crossing the Red Sea and God routed the Egyptian army. And we talked about there's going to be some very similar aspects to it. There's a song that is sung after the Israelites crossed the Red Sea. It's the song of Moses and Miriam. We're going to have a song of Deborah and Barak after this. We see that phrase of routing. We're going to see the same sort of way, and we're going to see God's hand, especially when we get into the song of Deborah. We'll see more in detail what happened on that battlefield. How did God intervene? And we're going to see that it's very similar to what happened with the Exodus. So here we have this total one-sided fight, and it says all the troops of Sisera fell by the sword, not a man was left. And it says in verse 17, but Sisera, however, fled on foot to the tent of Jael. So here's our next key character, our final key character. This is a tent wife. She's the wife of Heber, the Canaanite. And so it says, because there were friendly relations between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the clan of Heber the Kenite. So they have moved their clan, their tents closer up there. They are on a friendly basis with Jabin, King Jabin. And so Sisera sees this as a refuge, just as somewhere to go to hide. And so he comes upon Jael, and she is welcoming him. She went out to meet him in verse 18, went out to meet him and said, come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid. So he entered her tent. Now, in that day and age, that was a big no-no. A man did not go in a woman's tent. That was like, it was a perfect place to hide for him because they would not look for him. That if he was found there, there would have been, all kinds of trouble for him for being in a woman's, and it'd be shameful all the way around. But so she welcomes him into her tent, and it says she put a covering on over him. So she gave him a blanket, and then it goes on. And he says, "I'm thirsty." And he said, "Please give me some water." So she opens a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him up. So this is kind of odd, but we're seeing this roll out the red carpet type of thing where the milk would have been very expensive. This would have been a very expensive gift to give him. He's asking for water. She gives him the skin of milk, wraps him up. He goes to sleep. And so it's kind of an odd thing where we'll see it's kind of like a motherly type of thing. She's taking care of him. But it doesn't last very long. And so he tells her, "Stand in the doorway of the tent, and if somebody comes by, ask you, 'Is there anyone here?' Say no." So he's asking her to protect him, to cover for him, to allow him this sanctuary. And in this day and age, as well as in certain parts of the world today, this would have been very important. If somebody is coming to you in certain parts of the world, Afghanistan, Iraq, some of those countries, there is a code of hospitality that it is your duty to protect somebody that's under your protection. And so he probably felt safe because he felt like he was under this protection of hospitality. And so... But what does she do? In verse 21, it says, "But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted, and drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died." So she would have been very strong. These women, the nomadic tribes, their job was to pitch the tents. And then when they moved, they were to take the tents up and the stakes up. So she would have had a lot of power in her arms to take that stake and take that hammer. But a pretty graphic detail there, how he died. And so what happens now, Barak is pursuing him. And one thing we didn't say was, why is it important to pursue Sisera? What have we learned up till now in Judges about letting someone go, letting someone escape, and get away? What typically happens, do we see? Bad repercussions. They normally come back, sometimes even stronger than they were before. He was a very powerful general. And even though it says all of his men, all of his men were wiped out, not a single one was left, he as a brilliant general could probably possibly go and raise another army and be a threat to them again. So it's important that they hunted him down, they found him, and they took care of him. So in verse 22, it says, Barak came by pursuit of Sisera, and Jael went out to meet him. "Come," she said, "I will show you the man you're looking for." So he went in with her, and there lay Sisera with the tent peg through his temple, dead. On that day, God subdued Jabin, the Canaanite king, before the Israelites, and the hand of the Israelites grew stronger and stronger against Jabin, the Canaanite king, until they destroyed him. So this was a huge blow against Jabin. They had wiped out they killed his chief commander, wiped out his army. And so it wasn't the total defeat of Jabin at this point, but it was a huge pivot point in that conflict. And soon he was to be destroyed himself. So when Deborah made that prophecy at the beginning with Barak, because she said, because of the way you're going about this, the honor will not be yours. it will be to a woman. Who thought that was Deborah? When you first read it, you think, oh yeah, God's going to give the glory to Deborah because Barak is. So we see a twist here. It did come true. The prophecy did come true that the honor goes, and we're going to see it next here when we get into the Song of Deborah. But the honor goes to Jael. She's the unlikely hero in the story. We didn't expect a lowly tent wife to be the hero of this great battle, but it ends up being Barak's going to get just a couple of mentions in the song, whereas Jael's going to be lifted as the hero of this battle. So, any questions or comments before we move into chapter 5?
Verse 24, he will be the last. Which is the model.
And you're talking about in the song? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about Judges 5, and because of time's sake, we want to finish this. I'm not going to read the entire song, but again, this would have been something that a song that Deborah and possibly Barak wrote together. That they wrote this as a way to pay respect and honor to God who gave them this victory, that once they were gone, this might be something that was sung on occasions to remember this great victory, to remember God's deliverance. And so we see that at the Exodus as they cross the Red Sea, similar type of thing, and we see it here. And so the first, I would say 5 verses is just really giving praise to God. It says, praise the Lord. I will make music to the Lord, the God of Israel. So she is really acknowledging whose victory this truly is. This is not Barak's victory. This is not Deborah's victory. This is the Lord's victory. And in verse 4 and 5, she talks about the Lord leaving his place of rest and coming down. And as he did, the earth shook, the heavens poured. So here's a first glimpse of God's hand. How did God, the narrative in chapter 4 didn't really get into detail about how God worked to make this routing possible. But now we get a little bit of glimpse here. In verse 4, it says, the earth shook, the heavens poured, the clouds poured down water. So what happened? What did God make happen here at this battle? It was a flash flooding. I mean, we see what's going to happen to iron chariots when there's flash flooding. They're going to get bogged down. Those heavy chariots are not going to be maneuverable on this battlefield. So we have this lower plain, this river, the Kishon River Valley, and we have all this flooding that is going to basically make these iron chariots useless. So that gives us the first glimpse of God's hand in this battle. Verse 5 says, the mountains quake before the Lord, the one of Sinai before the Lord, the God of Israel. And then verses 6 through 9 kind of talks about the situation that was existing in Israel. It says in the days of Shamgar. So we talked about Shamgar. He was our one verse judge. And here we see him mentioned in her song. So, we talked about last week, well, maybe the reason he only got one verse is because everybody knows Shamgar. Everybody knows the great things that he did. And so she mentions him again. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the roads were abandoned. The travelers took to winding paths. And so it wasn't safe. Village life in Israel ceased. They were being oppressed. And it says, it ceased until I, Deborah, arose. Arose, a mother of Israel. So how does Deborah see herself in this whole story, in this battle? Does she see herself as a commander of the armies, a great leader? How does she see herself? As a mother, someone that cares deeply for her people, for the country. And when she has the chance to write a song about what happened, this is the title she chooses to give herself. A mother, not the mother, a mother of Israel, someone that just cared to do what was right and to make things happen, to be that leader that was needed to spur Barak on, to get these other tribes involved, and to protect the country, the people that she loved. So I think that's pretty good. We're going to talk about three mothers in this story. So here's the first one, Deborah, mother of Israel. And she said, until I arose. And then in verse 8, she's talking about the things that has happened. They chose new gods. What's this pattern that we're going to see continuous in Judges? This turning to the pagan gods, turning to idolatry. And so she talks about that. When they chose new gods, war came to the city gates. And who allowed that? God. God allowed the oppression. He allowed the war to come to the city gates. Not a spear or a shield was seen among 40,000 in Israel. And we talked about that because that may be a reason why Shamgar used the ox goad, is because it was they could not make weapons, they could not make swords or shields. And it says, my heart is with Israel's princes and the willing volunteers among the people. So she's praising those people, those willing volunteers, the tribes that joined in the battle, for what they did. She kind of shifts in verse 10 to talk to the leaders. Whenever you hear about those that ride on white donkeys, those that ride on donkeys, that would have meant some sort of royalty or nobility. Those are people that, when we think about it today, we're thinking donkey, riding on a donkey. But that in that day, that meant you were somebody. You had money, you had wealth, you had power if you were somebody that was able to ride on a white donkey. So she's talking to them and talking about how they should listen and also consider what was done here. And then we get down to verse 12. And, let's go to verse 11. It says, then the people of the Lord went down to the city gates. Wake up, Deborah. Wake up, break out in song. Arise, O Barak. Take captive your captives. And so here's the first time we hear the word, the name Barak mentioned. And so, arise, Barak. Wake up, arise. Go do. He finally did what God intended him to do. And then we kind of I'm going to skip through, but when we get to verse 14, we start talking about those that helped and those that didn't help in this battle. So it said in verse 14, it says, some came from Ephraim, whose roots were in Amalek. Benjamin was with the people who followed you. And so she kind of lists off, and I won't read it all, but she lists off again, over here are all the tribes that get credit in her song for answering the call. They were asked to come, they were asked to help. And they did. But then starting in verse 15, Reuben, it said Reuben searched their hearts. Why did you stay among the campfires? So now she's starting to point out those over here in this group that didn't. So Reuben didn't. It said that they were searching their hearts, but they stayed at the campfires. Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan. Dan lingered by the ships. Asher remained on the coast. And so we see these tribes sat this one out. They did not answer the call. They did not come to the aid of their fellow tribes. And so that's not good. It's not good, for one thing, to sit on the sidelines when God is calling Israel to action. But also, this would have been bad to be remembered in Scripture, remembered in their written history of not doing your duty. So this is really a negative thing for those tribes that did not come, that did not fight. Questions so far? In verse 19 of the song, it talks about the king of Canaan. It talks about they carried off no silver, no plunder. And then in verse 20, we get another glimpse about God's hand in this battle. It said, from the heavens, the stars fought. From their courses, they fought against Sisera. What's that?
I said, explain that.
Explain that? I was going to ask if anybody wanted to guess what that meant, and then I'll explain it from what I understood. John?
She was beating up on Reuben and all of those who did show up. And instead, she said, boys to run. She has a little bit of a sweet spot for those that eat.
Okay. Yeah. Could be. And again, this is just one commentary's interpretation. But what I read was anytime you hear about stars of heaven, a lot of times it's talking about angels. And so there is the possibility here that not only did men fight this battle and God lead the men and use nature. So we have men, nature, but we might also have supernatural angels that are also involved in fighting the army of Sisera.
It does say in chapter 4 that the Lord went down before you.
Mm-hmm.
So they're telling what he did, how he steered this. I don't think he personally went down.
But angel of the Lord could have led this with.
Nobody's going to open their eyes, so they need to see.
All right, so that it could possibly be that angels were involved in this, as well as God using nature to rout this army. But now we see in verse 21 what happened what did God make happen? It said the river Kishon swept them away. The age-old river, the river Kishon. March on, my soul, be strong. And so God, just like we see with the story of crossing of the Red Sea, used water, used nature, the forces of nature, storm, a flash flood to wipe these armies away.
Well, it talks about how confused they were all confused.
Right. Thunderous,
Did confuse their minds like the angels did when where Lot was, and the people that were trying to attack the angels, in the village, they were blinded by the angels so that they could not. The homosexual men were trying to get them, and so they were blinded. Well, the angels. I think it talks about that's when they were confusing the people that went to them, and his angel.
Yeah. Yeah, when Stephen gets into the story of Gideon, we're going to see confusion on the battlefield that God allows to happen as well. So it is something God uses to help as a part of that, confuse the enemy. Thunder, if God's causing this storm, there's thunder, there's lightning, and it's there's chaos happening that's confusing them. They're not knowing which way to go, and it causes confusion on the battlefield. Yeah. And I think that's going to happen here in the next part that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to skip down to verse 24 because it kind of goes on a little bit more about that. But now we want to talk about Jael. And so here's that second motherly character. So we've talked about Deborah, mother of Israel. Now, verse 24, most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Most blessed of tent-dwelling women. He asked for water, she gave him milk. In a bowl fit for nobles, she brought him curd milk. Her hand reached for the tent peg, her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera and crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. At his feet he sank, he fell, there he lay. And at his feet he sank, he fell, where he sank, there he fell dead. So, again, it's kind of this odd wrapping him in a blanket, giving him milk, putting him to sleep. We see these deceptions that she does to set him up, to make him feel comfortable, at ease, to relax. And then she does the just thing. She delivers God's justice. That was something Barak was supposed to do. Barak was supposed to deliver God's justice to these oppressors, but it ends up being this house or this tent dwelling woman who becomes the most blessed of the whole story. So where Barak gets his name mentioned just 2 times, it's like, wake up, Barak. Now we see Jael, who's the real true hero of this story, get all the accolades for delivering Israel at this time. Now, verse 28. Last week, Eli mentioned, well, this seems to really contradict New Testament teaching that we are to love our neighbor. When we see all this violence and God telling them, you've got to wipe out these Canaanites. They're just, get rid of them. They need to go. And how do we reconcile that when we see from our New Testament teaching how we are to love those that do evil towards us, and now but in the Old Testament we're seeing these people have to go. This third mother gives us insight of how evil the Canaanites were. And so this, starting in verse 28, is the story of Sisera's mother. Sisera's the commander. He's the one that fled on foot, went to the tent of Jael. She put the tent peg through his head. He's dead. But does his mom know that? No, she's waiting back in that town. I can't say it. The HH town that I can't say. She's waiting there for him to come back. So this is a story of a mother peering out the window, waiting for her son to return from battle. And it says, through the window peered Sisera's mother. Behind the lattice, she cried out, why is his chariot so long in coming? Why is the clatter of his chariots delayed? And you could say, oh, man, my heart's really going out. This is a mother. Her son's never going to come home because he just got a tent peg put through his head. And so it's easy for us to kind of feel sad. But then if we keep reading on, it's kind of like, don't feel sorry. Read on. And so if we read on, it says, the wisest of her ladies answered her. Indeed, she keeps saying to herself, are they not finding and dividing the spoils? A girl or two for each man? Colorful garments as plunder for Sisera. Colorful garments embroidered. Highly embroidered garments for my neck. All this as plunder. So one of the really graphic things about this is when it talks about dividing the spoils, a girl for two of each man, is the word that's used in there isn't girl. It's actually talking about the female anatomy. And so it's a very ugly way to think about the spoils of war. Of men are dividing up these women like they're objects for their pleasure. And so here we have a scene of a mother, an evil mother of this Canaanite nation that is, what's on her mind? She wants her son to come home safely, but she's thinking about all the spoils that he's going to bring back. And it's okay if they're dividing up the women for their pleasure and doing that because that's what they do. And that's fine, because what I'm going to get is these colorful garments. These colorful things are going to come to me. And won't that be great when he does come back to me? I'll have all this plunder and that. So here's kind of a glimpse into the mindset of the Canaanites. It was very materialistic. It was, pleasure, whatever pleasures you do, because you won the war. You do whatever you want to do, and the people that you conquered don't matter. And remember, when we talked about the pagan religions, it involved child sacrifice. And so these were very, very ungodly people, immoral people. And if they continue to allow them to coexist with the Israelites, we're going to see the same thing that happened. The Israelites are going to accept that culture. They're going to allow that culture and those false religions to kind of come in and corrupt them. And so this is kind of a insight as to why even though we may not understand why God said they needed to go and they needed to be wiped out, it gives us kind of an insight as to how awful and cruel they were. And then we finish up with the story of Barak and Deborah. It says in verse 31, so may all your enemies perish, O Lord. So again, going back and giving glory to God. But may they who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength. And the land had peace for 40 years. So we kind of see that end of the cycle. Now they're moving into that era of peace. All right. We're almost to the end. Yes. Yeah, this would have been yeah. I think she made this decision independently. I think her husband would have said, we're friendly with King Jabin and we owe him the hospitality. And this would have been, yeah. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily say God had this in her heart for her to do that, but obviously she had her allegiance right, even though her husband may not be aligning his allegiance to the right side. She, as a wife, may have quietly made a decisive decision to act. That's a good point.
Is a relative of Abraham. I mean, I don't think that it would have been put in there if it wasn't kind of an explanation why she did that. It talks about, who she was.
Yeah.
It
And
was the father-in-law of Moses. She was from that.
Yeah.
Even though whatever her husband wanted, she would explain why she did that.
Right. So he doesn't tell us why her husband chose to separate himself from the other Kenites and move north and align himself with King Jabin, but he did. But it sounds like she kept her heart true to the Israelites and on the side of the Israelites.
Then the first
Sure.
lobotomy.
Sure.
I'm wrong.
We're all judges able to prophesy.
What's that?
We're all judges able to prophesy.
I don't think so. If somebody else has an answer to that, but I think Deborah was very unique. Again, last week we kind of talked about Deborah. What was, and we don't know if Deborah was the only female judge. We don't know if this was really God's plan to have Deborah serve as a judge. Prophet, we see lots of different, and we shared that last week, the 4 other places in the Bible where we see women prophesying. But we don't know for sure if that was her real true gift and that's what she was to do. And then because she was the best person at the time, she took lead and became a judge. It doesn't say God raised up Deborah to be a judge. It never says that. It just says she was serving as judge. And so it could have been that she was the most godly person at the time in that area, that God needed to do this. But I don't think so. I don't think that they all had the gift of prophecy. I may be wrong, but I think we see different gifts given to different people, and obviously Barak did not have it, but we don't know if Barak was really truly supposed to be a judge, other than he's called up to be the deliverer. So, good question, and we are out of time. Thank you all for your. And we got Steve will have Gideon next week, and we'll continue on.
So we can get